So when you're building developer products, it's often your community that really makes the key differentiator for your business. And developers are also a very unique audience because, as we know, they're genuinely excited about great platforms, great tools, and they really like strong product designs as well. And so at Stripe, for example, since the early days, we really doubled down on making it super easy to onboard with the API and really taking care of all the details about developer experience along the way. So I'm super excited to have super great panelists tonight that all build awesome developer products, but also super strong developer communities with Firebase, Nylas, and Keen. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
The first question I would have for all of you is, why is community really integral to your company and what you're doing? And maybe you want to start, James?
Certainly. Yeah, so I think community is fairly essential to almost every single developer product. Developers are unlike regular consumers, where a lot of the signal they take is to whether or not to use a product, is say, how many stars it has on GitHub, or how many questions it has on Stack Overflow, or what signal they've got from say, I hate to use the word mavens, but like influencers in the developer community. And so in order to drive key business metrics like adoption, you need to have a strong community.
Awesome. What about you, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same for us. We're also a developer platform that helps folks integrate with email, and without our community, we wouldn't actually have a product and we wouldn't have a business, because if developers weren't using the platform, then they wouldn't eventually start companies and ship products and then actually start paying us for the infrastructure. So the community is kind of where it starts, and we rely on the community to kind of spread the word and tell people about things. And also, it's very interesting to see what actually people build with the platform and to get feedback from them. So we also rely on the community for figuring out what to build next and kind of for getting new ideas as to what people might find useful.
Those were good answers. I concur with everything my fellow panelists said. The only thing I would add from our perspective, well, there's two things. One, we were pretty bad at marketing from the start, but we were pretty good at product. So community became the way that we grew because word of mouth was the thing that worked and still drives more than 80% of our growth. So there's a very kind of business cynical language around that, right? Drives more than 80% of our growth. Okay, how do I get more of that? But the thing that's been really useful for us looking back after 5 years is that the developer community, so we have a very sort of use case agnostic product like a lot of developer platforms are. The developer community that was finding interesting use cases in 2013, that use case we can sell to the mid-market now, and we'll sell to the enterprise in maybe 5 more years. Yep. So they're the kind of discovery engine. You give them a bunch of tools and see what they do, and if it's repeatable, then we can describe what they did, and we didn't have to actually be clever because the community is so big that they can go be clever for us.
And of course, the three of you at our different stages in terms of companies and so on, but maybe you can give us a sense of the size of your community, or maybe your growth targets, how you're approaching them. I think James, for instance, at Google Cloud Next, you announced that 1 million apps now are using Firebase for their backend.
So I think size of community and size of active user base might be two different things.
Yep.
I would define community as somebody who sort of participates in whether social channels or in-person meetups or whatever it is. We have 1 million people who use our product, but our community number is probably less than that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our community kind of spans two different sets of people. One is developers, and the second is kind of email enthusiasts and power users who have downloaded our desktop mail application and are using it or playing around with it, or just are kind of interested in the cutting edge of email apps and technology. As far as developers go, we have about, I think it's over 20,000 developers that have starred our most popular GitHub repo. So that's one measure you can use. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get an exact measure of exactly how many people are in your community. We also have a Slack channel which has about 3,000 people on it. So it's kind of a mix of developers and also just enthusiasts, and we have different channels for each kind of type of folks.
Yeah.
So we're more that size than that size. So we across all our GitHub repos we have about 13 or 14,000 stars, and our Slack channel I think is about 1,200 people. So we use those, and then we look at like what are the kind of signals in the community that you can't quite measure. Obviously, we can certainly measure when they have accounts or when they engage on social media. And we're at we just hit 60,000 accounts at 3,500 companies those are the ones we know for sure are in our community.
Awesome. So before we dive in the conversation, I'd be curious to know a bit more about the audience we have tonight. Like, let's do a quick show of hands. Who here is a company founder, entrepreneur? A few of you, awesome. And who is more on the technical side, developer or developer advocates maybe? Okay. And maybe some of you are on the marketing side or like community managers. Great, so we have like a very diverse audience, like pretty much like equal balance in the three things. Awesome. So let's dive in and talk about product design and what it takes to basically build products for builders. And it's interesting because building a platform is often about like doing the heavy lifting so that like developers can be creative and do like things that were previously like very difficult to achieve or maybe even impossible at times. And that's really something I really enjoy about the three products that you guys are building, because like Christine, for instance, you abstract away the complexity of like Microsoft Exchange and IMAP, SMTP. For you, James, like it's all about like deploying like real-time apps and really complex backends. And for you, it's like no longer need to be like a big data expert. You can now leverage like super easy APIs for analytics with Keen, right? And so my question for you would be like, how do you appeal to developers to build tools for builders like that? Like, how do you cut the complexity so that all their work can be like the creative work, basically? I don't know if one of you want to start.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of a little bit of an art to actually finding the right balance of simplicity and also not making it so that your users can't do things that they want to do. For us, we kind of launched with like the simplest possible thing that you could actually build a useful email app, and had to add in a few extra knobs later because of demand. So, for example, our original sending API was literally you send like UTF-8, a body, subject, to, from, and any attachments, and then you hit send. Later, we had demand from some developers who wanted more control over the exact contents of that. So we added a separate API for sending raw emails. So you would send us the MIME object, and we would send that. I feel like you kind of have to go and experiment a little bit and find the right line. And it's almost better to err on the side of like too simple first, because whenever you launch something, you can't really, it's much harder to take it away than to give new things and new capabilities. And especially when you're running an API, you got to keep in mind that anything you launch and then that someone in your community builds something on, you effectively have to support it forever. So again, it's easier to give new things than to take them away. So maybe aim for simplicity first, and then kind of see if there's demand and people asking for specific features that you could add.
Well, what about you, Kyle? How did you think about like bringing like big data engineering and infrastructure as a powerful service, but like easy to consume for developers?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at it. And this is kind of our design principle in general. We were early on inspired by, and we figured it might work as a growth hack, by how Heroku went to market with, if anyone remembers back in maybe, I don't know how long ago, 5-7 years ago, git push Heroku master was like on the homepage. And that really resonated with us as a sort of, this is the minimum that I would need to do to perform what I'm trying to perform. So we even today when we're designing a new API feature or a new API product, we start on that, like at the whiteboard level. What is the minimum amount of, what Python code would I have to write to use this thing? And my co-founder, head of product, and I kind of sort of like, I don't know what the right word is, like torture the team. Just how many nouns are on that board? There's 7. Could it be 6? Which one would you scrap if you needed it to be 6? Like over and over again. Because, you know, the thing about building for builders is we're building for developers, but we're not building for distributed data infrastructure engineers, because those people are going to build their own. Yep. We're building for people that are higher up in the stack. So, you know, having somebody design those APIs who knows all the stuff underneath it. I don't know all the stuff underneath it. I used to, but I don't. So I'm still kind of the chief critic on that, because I'm a better critic now because I have no idea what's going on. So how many concepts would I have to learn? How many lines of code would I have to write? How many, I always think about how many nouns are in the system. Like, so if I only have to learn one or two things, I might use it. So that's the main focus for us.
What about you, James?
So I think bringing developers simplicity or building a tool developers would love, I would apply 2 heuristics. One is sort of what are the number of steps you can sort of reduce from intent to action per like Kyle's comments. I think you'll find a lot of interesting things that way. And then 2 is to look at larger companies and what they've built, and then either pull that out and make it more generalizable, or learn from them as best you can. So like Google and Apple and all of these big companies have built a ton of this like really interesting stuff. They had to build all these SMS gateways, and then Twilio came along and generalized it. Like a bunch of people had payment processing stuff, and then Stripe gave it to everyone. Google started to do their own kind of stuff with Kubernetes, so where they externalized this thing they have called Borg, which is like 15 years old at this point. But there's a ton of these tools that have sort of yet to be made general purpose. And so those are the 2 areas I would look for if you're looking to build both something developers love and a viable business.
Yeah, and there's really a lot of developer tools out there now. It's a growing number every single week. You mentioned, Kyle, the Heroku example back in the days. Like, what are some other interesting practices that you've seen in the wild from your peers, or like even other categories when it comes to like building something really delightful for developers to dive in?
You're talking about products that we like, or practices in the products?
Both, actually. Yeah.
I really like what Keen does. They send care packages to their developers, and will like handwrite like on the box.
Nice.
Which like generates a ton of love and trust, which is probably a theme that'll come up quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I really like what you do there.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I really like it when folks have a tool on their website that allow you to like interactively explore an API. So like using an example account, run queries on that account, which makes it a lot easier to just kind of explore and figure out like, does this API do what I want? What does the response look like from this? Which can be a little nicer than just like reading straight docs.
Yep. Cool. And we often know that like developers' happiness can really drive like success for a community, or even like success for a product. What are the things that you all have done in particular at like various stages of the product that help like developers get onboarded or have this moment of delight when they use your products? Are there like any tips and tricks that you found along the way, or some like some precise details about the onboarding that really worked out really well for those communities of developers? I don't know if one of you want to.
I mean, so there's the specifics, and then there's kind of the process of how to get to those specifics. One of the things we started in the early days, and it was easier when there were only 2 or 3 new developers a day coming into the site, is everyone would get an email from one of us that says, hey, I want to, if you're going to build something, would you like to pair program with somebody from our team? And we still do that. That's, more than an order of magnitude more volume. And a couple of things happen from that. One, very few people actually want to pair program with some random person that works at the company. They'd rather figure it out. But the people who do want to pair program can give a lot of signal. But 2, we get to watch, we get to see, we get to feel what it's like to learn from scratch. And I haven't found a way to replace that process. It's because every time we add new product, or we change the documentation, or we change the onboarding flow, being able to screen share with somebody during that is pretty valuable. I'm only doing like one of these every other month right now, but people that do real work across the company are doing it more. That's been great for finding the specifics.
Awesome.
I think that's a really important point, is like imbuing your team with the knowledge of what it's like to use your product. You can get like lost in the details and lose track of what the experience is like, or what your community thinks and feels about your product. We try and mimic that in a bunch of different ways from the beginning, and even now we have every new developer who starts at Firebase build a brand new application in their first week and report back to the product. When we were a startup, we'd bring people into our office and like present what they'd built over lunch. But the pair programming is sort of really, really next level. We tried to do a little bit in our user research feedback. We'd bring developers in and like put them in front of a video camera. and sort of some of that standard stuff. One of the other things in terms of the like time to aha moment that we did that was really, really successful was we had an interactive tutorial on our homepage for like the first couple of years. And it would walk you through step by step. And you could either like type out the code or just click next, and we would just auto-populate it if you were, lazy or didn't want to do it. And it would build you a working application that you could then like take and deploy. And it was massively, massively successful. And I think the activation rate for people who went through that interactive tutorial was something like 50%. Like between day 0 and day 30. It was really worthwhile.
Cool. I think some specifics kind of from our experience. We learned a lot about how people were trying to use the product actually from our sales process. A lot of folks kind of like go and Google like, how do I integrate with email, and find us on their own, and then they reach out to our sales team and they have their developers and they're trying to build, and actually like through that process, that's like how we engage with them and see like how they're trying to build, what APIs they're trying to use, kind of see what the pain points are. And one thing that kind of came out of that in the early days is that one of the hardest parts of integrating with our API is actually connecting an email account and authenticating it. So what we ended up doing was building into our developer portal a way to connect an account from the developer portal. So say you're a developer that just wants to play around, you can go through the auth flow right in the browser instead of having to like bootstrap your app and kind of get everything going. And then you get an access token, and you can go and plug that into curl and actually like get messages.
So you mentioned like both like product and documentation ideas and some like process ideas around like how to watch your customers. What would you say like some of the unscalable things you had done in the early days would be? Like typically, I think for you, Kyle, I read that you were also like a support person on the Google Analytics team a while ago, right? And so building up on the point you just made before, like you said that like earlier in the Keen existence, like the secret sauce was also to have like this support team, like really being hands-on with developers. Is that something that you consider today like unscalable, or something you would actually like try to push as long as you can?
Yeah, it's both. I consider it to be unscalable based on the evidence, and yeah, I keep pushing it as hard as I can. Through about 25 people, we had a policy of everyone rotating through support on some interval, so there wasn't a support team. We've dialed that down a little bit. Suffice it to say, it's still a pretty important part of everyone's career here, even if it's not like every 3 months you're going to spend 2 days just doing support. The kinds of support tickets that come in there's become more noise, right? Because it's like a bunch of people with billing issues. Is a platform engineer really going to learn about how the product feels if it's kind of the same kind of repetitive billing issue ticket? So I think that inserting a triage layer is the right kind of approach. So like at Google Analytics, I sat a couple of escalation queues deep, right? So after the triage layer, there are a bunch of engineers who could actually look at the code. We'll probably do that, but I would say scalable or not scalable. Good product is super scalable, and if you do this for the first few years, you'll get closer to good product.
Right.
Instead of the whole like disconnect between people making things and the people using them, if you're forced to confront the design shortcut that you took and see it like 5 or 6 times affect customers' lives, you'll probably won't take as many shortcuts. So I wish we could do it at our size now. I'm looking for the kind of the next kind of scale hack to make it work.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
One example from the Stripe side in the early days was that obviously Patrick and John was spending a lot of time with the early Stripe users, like you mentioned, but they also were receiving by email every API request log to their inbox. They would try to understand, like in the very, very early days, like how the API was used and like which parameters would be missing or something, being like, oh, okay, like the developer is stuck because they made this mistake in the API, we should document it better, and so on and so forth. Kind of the unscalable things that are actually valuable in the early days of building a developer product. I don't know if you had like some tips of like unscalable things that were super valuable for you on the Nylas or Firebase side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I would second what Kyle said. We also went through a phase where our engineering team was handling the entire support load, and we just, so we launched a free mail client and got tons of support and lots of interesting feedback. And so every other day, we would time box the engineering team dealing with the support backlog into like an hour in the morning. We found it was like really helpful to have the engineering team tackle that like all together and all at once, because otherwise it's like you're the one person dealing with support, and it's like, you know, you don't have people to ask like, oh, what is the status of that feature, or like, you know, have you seen this bug before, and like, does this need to go in the right place? Obviously, after a while, that became like the support no longer fit in the time box, and it became kind of frustrating. So we have also inserted a triage layer at this point. I think it's really important that developers remember what it was like to do support and do it sometimes, but there's also something to be said for like having heads down time to actually like translate the feedback that you get into like actual product improvements.
Yeah, plus one to the support stuff. We used to do the same thing. It kills me now that we can't do that anymore due to some of Google's rigidity. One of the other things that we did along the theme of just staying close to developers was we did office hours. And there's actually a funny story about how we got them started. One of our, like, employee number 1 put up on our site, like, Firebase is having office hours Friday afternoon from 1 to 4, come on by, and like didn't tell anyone else. So like that next Friday, like 10 people just showed up. They were like, hi, we're here for the office hours. And I was like, what? So needless to say, we kept that going for a while until the volume became sort of unmanageable, and we learned a lot from it.
Yeah, another thing that we did in the early days was the first app that launched in production on our platform, me and my co-founder gave them our personal phone numbers for any issues. I think they still have it, but they've stopped calling it. They go through the normal support channels at this point. But I think that was really helpful because, you know, when you're launching an actual like production application on a new platform, you're putting a lot of trust, and you rely on that platform to be up. So knowing that you have a direct line to the folks that are really pushing that forward and can get you whatever help you need is really valuable for like getting the first folks on board and getting them comfortable with the fact that they're using something that's like really cutting edge, but it's also unproven, and it might not be as stable as something that's been around for a while.
So speaking of community, how would you recommend like bootstrapping a community? Like James, for instance, I read this week in Hacker Noon that in the early days of Firebase, you created this group like 20 or 30 of the best hackers in San Francisco. Can you tell us more about what was the thinking process there?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would define community as like people who share a similar or a common interest. In the case of these people in this room, it's around using your product or service. They need to feel some level of ownership in the product. Yep. Typically, I think obviously they need to derive value from it, but they need to like provide value back to that community. So I think the easiest way to bootstrap that is through personal relationships. And so we needed a critical mass of people. So I basically went and used my network of people in San Francisco and recruited people based on personal relationships, put them all in a Google group, and then made them feel like they were developing the product with us. So we would ask them product design questions. We would say, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? We would send them swag, have them over for food, have them not just have a pairwise relationship with me, but also get to know each other. So that level of ownership and that level of relationship was kind of what bootstrapped the community. And then when it came time to promote us publicly, they were willing to go to bat for us. They were willing to write the comments on Hacker News or Reddit or Twitter or whatever it is, and that kind of got the ball rolling.
Kyle, I heard from Josh earlier that in the early days of Keen, you even conducted like unhappy hour to understand like what was wrong about the product and how to make it better.
Yeah, I think Josh was at one of those.
Tell us more about how you conducted those.
Yeah, so we had a little group. My co-founders and I had been developers in San Francisco for a few years and had our own network. So we brought some of those people in before we released anything publicly besides like a blog. Which was a great hack, by the way, well before we had a product. It was just a blog. We were just writing stuff, Hacker News bait, and driving signups, which gave us a great test audience as we started scaling. But this in-person test audience, were they called Unhappy Hour, I guess? Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, so we'd bring them and we'd be like, hey, we have this bizarro idea, and it's a totally undocumented piece of crap, and but here's like the API spec, and here's like, remember we built a visual API navigator, like Christine was talking about, the first one was really, really bad, but we showed it to them, and yeah, just kind of watched them try to figure it out and got their feedback. And I mean, Josh went home and made a way better query builder and applied for a job with it, and we hired him. It was like, this is a way better way to kind of navigate the API. But 2 of the other people in that room became 2 of our first 3 paying customers.
Oh, wow.
So when we applied to Heavybit 4 years ago, we had some paying customers, but they were actually friends that had, helped design the product. And then same thing as James was talking about, like that became our early kind of base to, if we tweet something and it's going to have three retweets, that's better than 0.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we maybe socially hacked it, but community is a snowball. You have to start with something in the middle. So it was pretty awesome. I forgot all about that. Relevant.
And Christine, for you, what would you say, like when you start a developer community, what would you say would be like ultimately the best activities you'd like those members to engage in? Like how to foster a community? Like what kind of expectation would you have for them? Like would it be to contribute to open source? Would it be to just like spread the word, like organize meetups themselves? What kind of activities do you think you'd love them to engage with?
To me, like the pinnacle of community involvement is folks that are building things on top of our platform. So like whenever I see someone who's like built a plugin for our mail app, I get so excited and I want to like tell everyone about it. Like someone built a plugin that allows you like quick unsubscribe from emails, and it'll like show you in the thread list. You can just like unsubscribe from those lists you don't want to. Someone else built a thing that was like, it will tell you how long an email thread has been in your inbox, so you can know how long you've been ignoring it. So like, to me, like a sign of success is like people like building these little things and sharing them with other people. And that's like kind of the best thing.
And how much do you think you should, when you build a dev community, how much do you think you should lead the community and monitor it versus like let it happen organically and give them the tools to actually like organize like events or like spread the word themselves? Like how do you find the right balance between like leading the community or letting it organize itself organically? Because I guess it's a pretty hard thing to do when you just get started, or even down the road when you become bigger.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone all back and forth and back again on that spectrum over the years. One of the key inputs is how much does it cost you cash-wise, how much cash do you have and want to invest? So one of the things we found was, we could get people, we could travel and we could go generate events and, try to growth hack them and take our developer customer base and ask them, hey, you're a developer customer in this city, do you have friends you can bring to this event? We've done that, and we used to do that a lot more. What we found 2 things that are a lot cheaper and a lot more scalable since then. One is finding other people who already have events and kind of leeching onto like a satellite circling Jupiter sort of thing. Like we sent somebody to London and he found in like 2 days that somebody else had this really big developer event and they were always trying to figure out how to fund it, and we just ended up buying pizza or something. It was incredibly cheap and we ended up with like 200 developers, and we were the special guest from Silicon Valley co-hosting the event. So if you can bring kind of a freshness to a geography and somebody else has the community organizing, but they're looking for the freshness, that's a really good synergy that's can be pretty cheap. So we started doing that a lot more, and then we took a kind of a page from Stripe's playbook, which is a lot more online community and a lot more, I guess, inexpensive, because we used to spend a lot of money traveling around. And for what we do, like anyone doing APIs that are going to integrate into a product and maybe even like be the foundation of the product or part of it, it's kind of hard to, if you can get 50 people really excited about the API, and it'll take 3 years to find out if any of them use it or how many of them. Turns out, in hindsight, those are all really good investments, but it's hard to prove in the meantime. So we found a lot cheaper things and quicker hitting things. Like going to a Drupal meetup and showing off our Drupal plugin is a really great way to get free access, and it's very actionable. Drop this thing into your environment and see what happens, as opposed to, here's a vision for our API, think about what you might build with it for the next 3 years. So we've switched to more of that.
What about you, James, on the Firebase side, like when it comes to like leading the community or engaging into it? I also know that you were doing a lot of hackathons, right, in the early days. I remember, I think, seeing like a drawing real-time app that you would show to people in a hackathon. How did that work out for you guys, like all around like hackathon and events, and how did you change tactics maybe over the years?
we had the online bent and we led it, and I think we lead it almost still to this day.
Yep.
Offline is really hard, especially since we're a for-profit paid product. Like if you're Angular or pick your open source framework, you will get people springing up because there's this sense of people are willing to invest because it's not profiting a corporation directly. So we went the route. Angular was our most successful set of people we'd co-present with, and we'd go to meetups around the world and be their special guests. So that worked out really, really well. In terms of online, basically we moderate heavily our Google group, and we encourage people to post things that they've built, and that generates conversations. Slack is sort of the only channel that we sort of let the community lead to this day. Okay. In terms of hackathons, this worked out really well. We basically picked the biggest hackathons that were going on. We'd attend very few of them, maybe one a month, but we'd send the whole team, and we'd wear our blaze yellow shirts. I think I met Kyle at a hackathon.
Yeah. You were wearing one of those.
Pro tip: you wear the undershirt, and then you can wear your company's t-shirts multiple days in a row.
What's the undershirt for?
It's because you swap the. So this worked immensely well, just for building that reputation in the community. Again, developer communities are very small. If you can make some noise at a 400 or 500 person event, and be oh, those Firebase guys, I saw them. Let me go check out their product. Even if you were using Keen or Pass or whoever, we would go and help you, even with our competitors' products, because you would walk away with a goodwill towards our team, and you'd be more likely to check us out. Again, hard to prove the ROI, but turns out that if you're doing that in the Bay Area, where again there's this critical mass of developers, I wouldn't do anything differently.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what about you, Christine? When it comes to you mentioned the plugin and how you get excited at times when you see specific integrations being built. How do you think about leading the community in one direction versus letting it organize and come up with creative ideas that you maybe did not think of in the first place?
I think for any kind of new platform in the early days, you almost have to show some leadership as the people producing that thing, and expecting people to just kind of discover it and figure out how to use it and build interesting things on it is kind of expecting to get a free lunch. Oh, I built this thing, they will come, right? Turns out it doesn't actually work that way. So kind of the approach that we've been taking is to build things that show people what's possible. As an example, it was really useful for us to build an actual mail application on top of the same data API that we are selling to businesses that are building apps, because it showed that it was really useful for developers to connect an account to the mail app and kind of see the email syncing and see what API requests that was making. And then when we kind of started pushing that mail app as the second piece of our platform, you can also build plugins that integrate into the mail app. We built the first set of plugins ourselves, and it's here's the kind of thing that you can build. A set of documentation is one thing, and a set of documentation and some actual examples of a useful thing that you can make is much more compelling. I think it's important to show folks some idea of what's possible, and not expect to get a ton of people making free contributions and building interesting things without a lot of input. Once you kind of get the ball rolling, it's kind of a different story in terms of how hands-on or hands-off you are. But I think at the beginning, you kind of have to be really, really hands-on.
Did anything surprise you around the community of developers as time went on and on for your products? Did anything come off as a surprise in the Firebase or Keen history of things you did not expect to be built, or things you did not expect to happen and just happened organically thanks to the community?
I'm continually surprised at what people build with our stuff. It was I think one of the first use cases that just blew me away was some professor at UT Austin was using us to monitor the health of their supercomputer cores, and this was 2 months after we launched, and I was do you know what state our infrastructure is in? What are you doing? This was private beta, and we had just started batch inviting people. Like the mayor of Taiwan used us to get reelected in our first year, and we didn't have a security system yet.
That's amazing.
Yeah, there's just some people build some. That's the best part of my job the most fulfilling and rewarding is we as makers of developer tools give people a bunch of Legos and you have no idea what they're going to build. It's really cool and it's so unique.
My favorite thing is while we were focused on building kind of enterprise email features, some guy in an art lab built an integration that would ingest the email list for his art lab's group and print all of the emails on a receipt printer. And so he literally had 1,000 feet of emails that were printed using our API, which was just I would never imagine that anyone would build something so bizarre. But it was cool because we were thinking of it as being something that's really kind of business focused, and we had people oh, I just want to do this weird hack, and I can use the API for that as well.
Like James said, I mean, for us, that's the whole point. We think that historical event data is valuable precisely because it could be useful in a kind of unlimited number of ways. And for us, so the surprises are what are the most fulfilling part of my work too. I think it's always exciting to hear that strange thing somebody came up with, or to hear the new thing. When we were getting started, we were trying to describe these concepts to people and investors and press and whatever. And I always used a few go-to examples of why would you need a platform for this? And one of them was, objects are going to be on the internet. It's a thing. Connected device explosion. And I had this, smartwatch and smart tractor thing on my, my first failed Series A pitch deck. And 3 years later, we had pretty much we had 4 of the big 6, smart wearable companies. We had John Deere literally using us for their smart tractor. That was surprising because it's surprising sometimes when you're right too. But that's kind of the power of something that captures, emerging needs. And now we have all these we just got our 8th chatbot customer, and the first 6 we didn't even know were chatbot customers, and we were looking at the API traffic and we're this is weird. They have long strings and everything. Why would you have long strings? We emailed them because we don't look at their data, and they were oh yeah, we're sending you message data. And apparently chatbots are a big trend. So consumer IoT and chatbots, and now there are a few VR companies. So for us, it's really fun to see what trend Gartner's going to talk about in 2 years, because developers are the people building it now. So that's the most exciting part for me. It's just really pretty cool.
So the 3 of you are building obviously cloud services and APIs. I'm curious to hear more from you around how open source changed the perception of your company and how it can benefit the company. I know, for instance, Christine, you started in the open source really early on, right? When you were in high school, you contributed to Debian. How does that experience change your perception to open source, and how can you engage in a really positive way with the open source community when you're building those cloud services?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did that was pretty unique was we released an open source version of our actual server software. So lots of people are releasing their SDKs on GitHub and stuff like that. But we actually released a version of the piece of software that we use to sync email and server API. And we're super scared when we flip the bit on the repo to make it public on GitHub. And we're what if, I don't know, something terrible happens? And it turned out that no one discovered this repo for 6 months first. Then when they did discover the repo, 2 first, nothing happened. And then over a while, we actually started using the presence of having this repo open source on GitHub to help developers feel more comfortable starting to build on the platform. So one thing that we heard over and over again was that when you're building a new product, you want to make sure that if the company you're building on goes out of business, then you're not screwed. We could, in those sales calls, tell them well, if anything happens to the company, we know it's really early, but we released this on GitHub, and you can run it on your own and just like run it on-prem if like anything happens to the company. Plus, there's like a security aspect, especially when dealing with email, where people are really concerned about security and privacy, and that really helped us to be like, well, you can just like go look at the code and read it and see exactly what we're doing behind the scenes. So I think the things we got out of it was like really comes down to trust in different aspects. Trust when it comes to like security, and trust when it comes to like, will you be around in 2 years when my app is taking off?
So you would see open source as like a key component to also not only build a community, but also inspire confidence into building for your platform, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get over the hump of like people not seeing you as like something that they can depend on.
Yeah.
And open source for us was like a key component of getting over that hump.
How do you approach open source at Keen, Kyle?
We haven't gotten to that stage, although we've thought about it for years. So we do what a lot of people do, which is make a bunch of SDKs, make it easy to consume, right? We make money on consumption, so what can we do to drive it? Open source is a great way to do that, particularly to get us into languages where we're not fluent. One of our kind of core principles around this is we don't want SDKs out there to kind of be the Keen supported SDK for language, and when you read that, you can, I call it like writing it with an accent. Like if I wrote a .NET SDK, it would have an accent. It wouldn't, to a .NET developer, it would look like somebody that is not a .NET developer made this. And that was, as a developer, something that always made me think twice about a given piece of software. If it's like, this is not, this AWS Python script is not written by people who have ever written Python. Like, there wouldn't be like 900 class
probably
files.
auto-generated.
Yeah, there's like 900 class files and this crazy abstract tree of, no, I mean, not that that's the wrong way to make all kinds of software, but it didn't smell right, So we focus on the kind of quality of the ones that we officially support, and then similarly, we've spent a fair amount of time making things just to show what's possible. So there's the SDKs, like bindings, how do I use the API? And then there's stuff that you can do in addition to that, right? So like we have a library, like a fairly big data visualization library that's really just how to make dashboards in Bootstrap, and it drives a lot of growth for us. It also we get to show off, because that's a skill set we have on the team. We get to show kind of really clean code quality. We think any code that the company puts out is marketing for what's underneath, even if we don't share everything. And then reference architecture. Like, I didn't know that was possible. Like Josh over there, when he worked for us, made this thing that lets you automate like Slack messages based on historical event state, which is incredible and super useful, but it also opened us up to this whole new market around automation, which became a problem because we weren't even charging for the right things at the time. So it drove enough consumption we had to change our pricing model, because automation has taken off for us since then. So like showing people what's possible is the main way we use it.
Are your official SDKs open source?
Yeah.
Have they ever not been?
They've always been open source.
Got it. So there's some threshold that you need to get over, and I think the threshold is the bar on that threshold is set based on the size of the pain point that you're solving. Like, if you're solving a big enough pain point, like, developers will go with you even if you aren't open source. They would certainly prefer to be open source. As Kyle was saying, like, the secret sauce and like all of the value is our backend, like, cloud-hosted services. So we've wanted to get around to open sourcing our SDKs, but haven't, just because of the developer workflows and everyone sending in like pull requests, and how do we manage that and triage them and set up the processes, and we just sort of never got around to it. But I think because of the pain point we were solving, we were able to, though. In retrospect, I maybe would have done it a little earlier.
Great. I like how you speak about secret sauce, because if you guys did not know, in the early days, Firebase used to give away actual hot sauce at hackathons, right? Do you still do that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You
Of course
do?
we do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So one last question for you guys, and I think we're going to open up for questions in the audience. So if you have some questions in your mind, we're going to pass along a mic. One question I would ask you is around how do you share your roadmap with your community of developers, and to what extent do you take like community feedback into it? So I know, for instance, that Slack on the platform side, they experimented with a Trello board where they have like all these ideas, and then people can come along and put them into the Trello board. I think that's something that you have experimented with, Christine?
Yeah, we've done a few different things over time, but probably one of the most successful things was having a Trello board where users could actually go and vote on things they wanted us to build. So that was like a way that people could feel like they had input into our roadmap when, in reality, like when you're making the roadmap, it's like, your internal needs and like the things of your customers, and then like the community needs is like only a small piece of like how you're doing your planning. But having a way for having something to tell people who are like, I want to see this thing, like, well, you can go vote on it on the Trello board and, we'll consider it. I think is a really valuable thing to have.
What about you, James, on the Firebase side? Like, do you like share any roadmap, or maybe that's changed now between like the time you were independent or now at Google?
We used to, and we've stopped after, even before we joined Google, just because we'd missed dates and everyone would get like angry at us. So I think you
don't put dates. Don't put dates on anything.
Yeah, well, even when we said we were going to build something, we would oftentimes do some product development on it and then discover it was like actually not what the product needed or the direction we wanted to go. So now we don't share anything, and it's sort of been some slow progression between like the thing we were building and the date to just the thing we were building to now we stay pretty mum. If it's like blindingly obvious or it's like 80% done, then we'll share it.
You guys at Keen share any roadmap or like kind of what's coming next?
No, we don't really very much at all. When you asked the question, I was like, oh, I wonder why we don't. So for big things, we're intentionally secretive because we want to be able to get the biggest splash that we can. Most of those things are driven by how people use the platform for so many different use cases, but which of those, call it 40 use cases, is this going to help? And is it about driving new customers, opening new markets?
Yep.
Is it about retaining or expanding accounts that we have? Or is it about keeping them from getting mad at us or something? Or is it performance? So performance stuff we're very open about. That usually comes about based on some incident anyway. It's like, oh, we had this thing get cloggy and we wrote a blog post about it and here's how we're gonna fix it, and like 2 days later we fix it. But we've been very secretive about it. We do use the community a lot for their feedback. So like systematically I email developers. It would appear random, but I take targeted groups of developers in our base and just email them directly with a cryptic email from me that says your advice. If anybody here's a customer, you might have gotten one at some point. And I just ask them if I can get them coffee or get on a Skype call or something to talk about something. And that's where I do my sort of high level.
So at the very least, getting feedback.
It's like,
from
hey,
users
so
directly,
it's like, hey, so here, what's the worst thing about the API? I have a few of these kinds of questions for general feedback, and then if we made a feature like this, would that be useful? Would you use it? Would you pay for it? How would you budget it? And then we have a customer advisory group for like under NDA. So we're super secretive, I guess. I was thinking, I don't even know if we ought to be. That Slack thing sounds really cool. But we meet with them, our major customers, every quarter to talk about what's coming. And in some of those, occasionally I can get my co-founder to put a date on it. We don't miss those because they're very rare that we do that.
Awesome. Well, if you have any questions, I think Sam has a mic.
We measure Slack, Stack Overflow, our Google group, and then like Twitter and Facebook, but those are kind of like second tier, and that's more marketing than community.
Yeah, we actually primarily measure our number of paying customers and don't have much of a quantitative focus on like community size. I think it depends on like what stage your company is at and kind of like how much you pay attention to that. For us, like there's still like so much moving in terms of just like customers coming on board that like we just haven't had the attention to pay to like how many people are asking questions on Stack Overflow.
So it depends what you mean by measure. We have this historical data API that we get to use for free. So we measure everything you might possibly imagine on this stuff. But another way to answer the question is, what do we use or what do I use? We look at Stack Overflow. We look at like support ticket volume. We have in our new triage. We just rolled this out like 2 weeks ago. There's a new intercom queue for this would be a good Stack Overflow question, so our community team can jump in there. After they're happy, send them a note that says, hey, could you put this on Stack Overflow? We'll answer it, and more people will get value out of it. That's one of the major things that connects.
That's a good idea.
It's amazing because then the next time they Google it, so every error message qualifies.
Yeah,
like that way when people Google it, they find on Stack Overflow. So that's kind of an example of maybe leading something that's already kind of organic. So we measure all that stuff. But engagement's tricky. Like the thing we look at the most is our product qualification stuff. So like what API features are they using? What SDKs are they using? What is used and what have they tested and not engaged with? It always at the end of the day comes down to actually using the product. So that's the main driver for us.
Yeah, it's pretty similar for us at Stripe. We have like kind of the same like places we monitor closely. We also have a team of like support engineers who like contribute to Stack Overflow fairly heavily, and so we make sure that like every questions over there gets answered pretty fast. And all our API libraries are also open source, so we try to encourage like pull requests and like community contributions to those.
I think it's hugely important. I think like ensuring that your community members feel ownership over the product is the best way you can do that, and how maybe you should like think about it philosophically. So one of the things that we did was I think we must have been about like 40,000 developers or so, 40,000 developers, like registered accounts, is we spent like 10 grand, and my co-founder thought I was insane at the time for doing this. We spent 10 grand and we got everyone a hoodie, a Firebase hoodie with their user number embroidered for like the first 150 developers. And so we sent this out to our first 150 users, and they loved it. They like would tweet about it, and like I still see them walking around like wearing it to this day, and they've sort of become these genuine advocates. And we've done that for like along a number of different dimensions, not just hoodies. That's one way I would think about how to turn community members into advocates.
Well, the care packages that James mentioned are still an ongoing kind of thing. So, we send those. We have an Easter egg in our API. You have to kind of learn various parts of it to use to request, a T-shirt, and then we send out a care package. We also do it when somebody files an issue on GitHub or responds to another customer in Slack or on Stack Overflow with a reasonable answer. And then they almost invariably take pictures of them, tweet them, put them on Instagram or Twitter or something, and we share those. It's less about turning people into advocates, but it's when they do become advocates, amplifying their signal so other people see the example. And that's pretty much all we do.
A personal thank you, like reaching out unprompted to one of your community members and saying, hey, thanks for doing this, or hey, I really like what you built on us, it goes so far.
Like a little handwritten note sometimes.
Or just even an email, like if you don't have their address. It's one of those sort of unscalable things that we were talking about earlier, but it makes all the difference.
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to the fact that when developers are passionate about tools and products in general, they will tell their friends, and that's the best way to get like a community started, right? Like if they're excited by your product, and if they really want to use it, and if they have like this wow effect when they start using it, then they will immediately tell their friends, and then fortunately you can maybe turn a bunch of them into advocates.
One of the biggest opportunities to like create an advocate as well is when somebody's had a bad experience with your product. So if somebody comes in through support or writes like a Medium post on like why you like your product is terrible, like reaching out to them and like diffusing the situation, whether it's through the support channel or if they've written something and saying, hey, like I'm sorry, we messed up, like here's what we're doing to get better. And then like I actually had in the early days, and I still have a couple of them, but people who have written blog posts, and I've marked like, hey, we'll have this feature that will solve this, and I'll go and like follow up with them. And that's really effective as well.
We talk to folks a lot on Twitter, actually. My co-founder is kind of a genius at diffusing bad feelings with funny GIFs. Highly recommended. Get familiar with Giphy, and like if someone's having a bad day and is taking it out on your product, you could probably fix it with some GIFs. We also send people stickers, and like for people that are particularly like have built something cool, we'll send them T-shirts. That's probably the biggest things. We also have had a couple folks who have kind of gone above and beyond, and we've kind of like deputized them and given them like official roles in the community. Like there's this one who was like a kid in the Midwest who was helping out a lot with us organizing our GitHub issues, and so we kind of like gave him the official blessing, kind of gave him a commit bit and allowed him to do that officially. And I think that kind of giving people that recognition is really important, and it's like pretty easy to do, especially if like people are doing free work for you.
So we've seen that absolutely that. One of the things that we've started implementing over the last even 3 or 4 months that we started figuring out last year was you can get a little bit more segmented when you dive into the framework level instead of the language level. So, yeah, I mean, I'm an analytics geek, so I'm not gonna, forgive me I'll digress for a second. Like, you can't optimize for like steps 2 and 3 in some funnel in isolation, because if you're just saying, like you said, we get more adoption in this group, and maybe that's a growth campaign or a community evangelism investment or an SDK level investment, and this one's getting better cost per lead, so let's juice that one. Like, you kind of have to see the whole thing, and in the absence of the data, like if your adoption cycle's 3 to 9 months like ours, we can make some assumptions. So I mentioned Drupal earlier because we're doing a bunch of new stuff in Drupal over the next couple of months, and we've always had decent traction in PHP. Turns out Drupal is a community within the PHP developer community that has its own specific and unique needs, but also there aren't a lot of hobbyists just using Drupal to like automate their house or whatever. It's pretty much a professional framework and in professional environments. So in theory, if we could get the adoption rates to be somewhat similar or even half, everyone's working on something that they're gainfully employed to work on, as opposed to Raspberry Pi analytics or whatever. That stuff's all great and it's all cool, but we see the same patterns, and we're very deliberate about those investments.
We ended up breaking out a bunch of our online communities by framework, and ended up like retracting it and folding it back into one because it was just too much management overhead. So we'll go and do specific events for iOS developers at like RW DevCon or whatever. And so like the offline stuff we'll segment by community, but the online stuff it's all munched together.
All right, so to wrap up, maybe one last thought you would share for like all the audience here, like what is the one most important thing you would tell anyone to build a strong developer community starting tomorrow? What should they implement first or think about first?
It's all about documentation.
Documentation.
The most leverage for us has always been in that.
Anything that's not the secret sauce, you should consider releasing it as open source. Someone will find it interesting.
Your company and your organization probably has a culture. The group of people that you sit in a room with every day building your product, like you have a way of talking to each other, you have a way of interacting, going to lunch, whatever it is. Just like take that and like project it to the world. Like be you, be genuine. I think developers like really geek out on that stuff, and like just as humans, they'll connect with you and your product and your team.
Awesome. Christine, Kyle, James, thank you so much. Thank you.